Welcome. I'm your host, Henri Arslanian, and welcome to the Future Money Podcast. My goal with this podcast is very simple. It's to go deep in some of the biggest ideas, trends, and developments we are seeing in the field of crypto, and hopefully empower you with this information, and then let you make your own decision on what their impact can be on the future of money and finance. To do this, I invite each week one of the leading figures of the global crypto community to have a one-on-one conversation amongst crypto aficionados and discuss some of these topics. But before I introduce our special guest for today, I want to thank the 500,000 of you who follow me every week across my various social media channels, from LinkedIn and Twitter to the various YouTube channels, really for making this Future Money podcast such a success. Despite the fact that we only launched a book only a couple months ago, we have now thousands of people listening to each episode from over 100 countries. So big thank you for all your support. Now let's kick off with the show. My guest today is Laura Shin, one of the most respected journalists and hosts of Unconfirmed podcast. And one thing you may not know about Laura is that she's really big into meditation, chanting, and yoga. Laura, great to have you with us today on the Future Money podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Laura, before we start, there's so many topics I want to talk about today, from the state of crypto journalism, about your personal experience as a content creator, and of course, about your upcoming book as well. But maybe would it be helpful just to share with the audience? I'm sure many of the crypto aficionados that are listening today know a lot about you. Maybe share about your background, how you got into crypto, and of course, how your very known podcast came to be as well.
Yeah, so I was a journalist for a long time, covering a lot of different beats. And at the time that I uncovered crypto, or for myself, not to the world, I was covering personal finance, and I had been covering it for, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years at that point. And because it's one of those beats where when you learn about it, there isn't a ton of change, I was getting to the point where I was feeling like, oh, if I'm going to cover a certain topic again, it's basically kind of going to be the same story that I wrote before, but with different words. And that is completely unappealing to me whatsoever. So I was interested in, trying to switch beats. And my editors said, hey, we have this idea to do a Forbes FinTech 50 list. Do you want to head it up? And so another reporter and I headed up that list, and we divided it into categories. And I took the category of digital currencies and just became completely obsessed at that point. I was very lucky to have a source who explained the Bitcoin blockchain to me in a really thorough way, in a way where I really truly understood, wow, this is going to be a total game changer. And at that point, because I had been, doing a lot of research for the FinTech 50 list, I definitely was well acquainted with what the problems were with the banking system, and really understood kind of that our money, even though it may be presented to us over a website which looks digital, is not actually digital. And so I kind of immediately grasped what the import was of Bitcoin and blockchain technology. And then, just became completely obsessed. And that was in the spring of 2015. And then a year later, in June 2016, I launched my podcast, Unchained, which it's not the oldest crypto podcast, but it's probably the oldest that kind of got a big following, because some of the other ones that had launched before were either very kind of like talk radio like, or were so technologically in the weeds that it was kind of hard for other, just kind of a normal layperson to understand. So I think mine was maybe the first one that was geared toward a mainstream audience. And I later left Forbes and have been working on my book it's going to be 4 years actually by the time this book comes out, when you include the months that I spent working on the proposal and pitching it. So, the book comes out February 22nd. It's called The Cryptopians, and I am so excited for you all to read it. It's mostly a history of Ethereum, but it also goes into the 2017 ICO craze.
We're definitely going to talk about the book over the next couple of minutes. Maybe by way of background for our audience, what pushed you to launch that podcast? What was the catalyst of launching the podcast back in 2015?
It's just so simple. I just was listening to a lot of podcasts and I love podcasts. And in the spring of 2016, so in the spring of 2016, I was actually a freelancer for Forbes, and I didn't start working for them full time until 2017. But I saw that they launched a series of podcasts, and I said to my editors, "Hey, I want to launch one about blockchain technology." And they graciously let me be, because it was supposed to be an initial run of 12. So I became the 13th Forbes podcast, lucky number 13. I think I'm the only podcast that's still running after that initial group.
That's amazing, and the rest is history, I guess, from that perspective. I mean, you're absolutely right, Laura. I think your podcast has become probably the oldest podcast that I know in crypto. I mean, it must be pretty big. I mean, how big is it? Can you share with the audience, some of your audience listeners? And I mean, you changed probably a lot of lives. A lot of people, I'm sure, got into crypto because of the content you've been putting out.
I have to say, I've had so many people over the years who've come up to me at conferences and said, "Laura, I work in this space now, and the reason is because of you. I was listening to your podcast and I really just became so enamored with this technology. I just really had to work." I mean, I literally cannot tell you how many people have said things like that to me. And it really means a lot. I mean, it's kind of, it's just very humbling to realize, oh, I was just doing this for my own fun. And it basically changed a lot of people's lives. And from the way they speak about it, they seem to think for the better. A lot of people, I think, weren't happy in their jobs before, and they sort of feel the way that I do now that I cover crypto. This is the number one, or my number one most favorite beat I've ever covered. I've never had more fun doing journalism ever in my life. And I think they feel the same way for whatever their role is, whether they're like developers or analysts or, other journalists or, I mean, there's just all kinds of roles in, when it comes to crypto. And yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people have listened to it and, decided to jump in.
It's interesting, I've been teaching crypto in fintech university for many years. Even at my apartment, I have a wall of gifts that I've gotten from students. And actually, a lot of people listen to my crypto capsule. Same thing, they decided to go into crypto. And once you're in, as you know, Laura, once you're in the rabbit hole, you're never coming out. So it's very, very interesting from that perspective. I want to talk about crypto journalism, Laura. Obviously, as a journalist, where do you think, if let's say from a scale from 1 to 10, where are we, you believe, when it comes to level of quality, depth, and professionalism of crypto journalism right now in the crypto industry?
I mean, it's a very difficult thing to put one number on simply because it really runs the gamut. It probably depends when you look at which outlets or even specific reporters, which ones are doing better than others. There's definitely certain outlets where maybe they're dedicated to crypto, but I happen to know that actually they do things like pay to play. So obviously the information that you're getting there is probably pretty questionable. I'm not talking about any of the major ones that people know. But probably when it comes to the major crypto outlets, they're probably doing a decent job. I think one of the challenges in this space is just that it changes super fast. And so that kind of like daily grind of like just getting the news out and really maybe not necessarily even having the time to process and analyze things like that can be a challenge, and just also with kind of the way the media business works, where most outlets are funded by advertising. And so there can be that drive to generate clicks, which also maybe doesn't always, give the best incentives. I'm sure a lot of people have seen articles where it's like, I'm not going to name which token, but, fill in the blank meme coin that doesn't really have, much innovative technology behind it goes up, some huge percentage. And I'm sure there are people out there who really don't know any better who read that and are like, oh, I need to buy this coin. And, then unfortunately realize later, like, oh, it's now crashing now that I've bought in. So, there are definitely issues, I think, but by and large, I would say that certainly crypto journalism is so much better now than it was years ago. I mean, I remember early on in 2015, when I first started covering this, one of the entrepreneurs that I wrote about the product that his company was offering, and he said to me later, He said, "Oh, your article was the first article where my friends and family said that they finally understood what I was doing." And that meant so much to me, you know? But the fact that like all these other people had written about it and like his friends and family could not understand what was going on from what they'd written, like that's kind of disheartening, you know? So I think now there's definitely a greater understanding of the technology, how it works, and hopefully a lot better storytellers and journalists that are now covering the space.
It's interesting. I mean, and I agree with you. I think there's a lot of pay to play that's taking place in the industry, not only I would say with journalists, but also with content creators as well. But do you think what can be done in order to have more disclosures, more transparency? I know you're very, very vocal about the fact that you own almost no cryptocurrencies because it gives you the freedom to write about what you want to do. What do you think needs to be done in the industry for the industry to be more professional, especially when it comes to these pay to play and other kind of approaches that you just mentioned?
You know, I mean, it's hard to know what to do about pay to play. I personally have had different people try to get me to engage in pay to play, and they're like brand name companies, like household name companies. And when I say that, I mean like, you know, think single digit fortune companies that have tried to, where I've literally had to say that to them, "Oh, if you're interested in pay to play, there are other outlets that do that." I've literally had to say this in like meetings with potential sponsors. It's kind of mind boggling. But, you know, as for whether or not outlets do it, frankly, I think people know. I mean, that's the thing. Is like when I remember there was an article in 2017 that came out about a certain coin being promoted by a certain character with a very widely known public history that was negative. And the article on this in this outlet did not mention that. And not only that, but kind of pumped up the coin and made it sound like it was going to be the best thing ever. And people were calling them out for it. And it was very obvious it was kind of a pay to play type thing. So, you know, I actually feel like a lot of the crypto outlets do a good job with their disclosures. When I worked at Forbes, that was the policy that I was under. And so at that time I did own some crypto and I just had to disclose it all in all my articles. And, you know, I personally think that's fine. I frankly, just because now I don't work for anybody. And if I were to try to write for certain publications, they would require that of me. That's pretty much the only reason that I personally don't own any. At the moment, my business does own some ETH for things like I just had to secure my Ethereum name service domain names associated with my brand and stuff. So scammers don't get those. And like I will probably launch some NFTs with my book. And so I actually, my company owns some ETH at the moment. And actually a few Sol tokens just in case I launch any on Solana. But, you know, they're not for like my personal investment or enrichment or anything. That's literally just to use for business purposes. But what I was trying to say is just, I feel like, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong personally with journalists owning things that they cover as long as they disclose. So that's just my personal opinion. And I feel like it seems like a lot of the crypto publications have that policy.
This episode is brought to you by Crypto.com, where you can buy Bitcoin and over 150 other cryptocurrencies with over 20 different fiat currencies. Get up to 8% cash back instantly using the Crypto.com Visa card, plus 100% rebates for your Netflix, Spotify, and Amazon Prime subscriptions. Check out the link in the podcast description to download the Crypto.com app and stake CRO to get $25 with the code Henri2022.
Thankfully, you're right. I think things have changed quite a bit. I'm sure you get it as well. I get approached almost on a daily basis now from projects and stuff where it's very clearly token shelling, right? And I think once you start getting into that hole, it's very difficult to get out of it, actually, from that perspective. What's your view, I would say, from, let's say, there's two, three things I want to ask you about. One of them is, obviously, over the last couple of years, really traditional media has started covering crypto as well. What's your view of the way they're covering the space? Do you think it's very high level? Do you think they're doing a good job? Do you think there's areas for improvement? What's your view on the traditional media's coverage of the crypto industry?
Like I said before, each outlet is very different. And I started covering from a mainstream outlet. So, and even within that outlet, there were some reporters who were better and some maybe who were not as good. So it just really runs the gamut, frankly. I mean, there have been a lot of really great articles I've seen, especially long form, because, that tends to take more resources. And so, like, for instance, when the whole Quadriga CX scandal happened in Canada, where the founder died, although it was under such mysterious circumstances that many people speculated that he had faked his death. And it ended up being that, frankly, he had plundered the exchange before he died. So it wasn't, initially the story was that they couldn't find the keys to the exchange, but then no, when they checked the accounts, all the crypto had been taken out. So, there was a great article on that in Vanity Fair, which is, a totally mainstream outlet, like not something necessarily where you would necessarily think it's crypto, but it has a lot of elements of a good Vanity Fair story, right? Like, this person lived a very glamorous lifestyle. I mean, he had private planes, he had a yacht, he went on these, very decadent vacations. And then, of course, there's he had this beautiful wife that, then the mysterious death. So, all those things. And that kind of reporting takes time and resources. And a Condé Nast, they have the money to do that. And so it's really wonderful, I think, that we have mainstream media outlets that are interested in covering crypto, because frankly, the crypto outlets that are just trying to keep up on the news, they also do a good job with in-depth reporting, but they simply do not have the same level of resources. And so I really feel like it's great that we just have all different kinds of players who are engaging here.
I remember that story of Vanity Fair very well, and you're right, it's a very interesting coverage to show picture of his boat and how he goes sailing and stuff like that, right? Actually, one last question before we talk about the switch over to the book. Obviously, you've had a lot of guests over the years. What do you think is the biggest mistake crypto professionals or crypto entrepreneurs are doing when they're talking to journalists or to the media?
That's a good question. It's so funny. My immediate thought is, they don't have a good mic setup. Okay, so let's see.
That's true, though. Mic and light are so important. I even travel now, believe it or not, with the microphone and light with me wherever I go in my carry-on. But you're absolutely right. That's a big problem. But I mean, that's more fundamentally. Do you think, for example, the media training, do you think like there's a lot of more training that should be provided to crypto entrepreneurs to know how to deal with journalists and the media?
Obviously, I think that's really good, because the better that they can get their ideas across, the better for them and for the crypto space in general. I guess one other thing that I would say is, right now we're seeing that a lot of crypto people and VCs take an immediate negative attitude toward journalists. And, I just personally don't think I find that any kind of like mass stereotype like that, it just doesn't kind of really match how the real world works, right? It's like what we were saying before about how some outlets are better than others and some journalists are better than others. And it's the same, with different entrepreneurs in this space. There are some entrepreneurs that I've met that are probably on the scammier end, and then others that are really on the up and up. And so that's why I would just caution people to not paint all journalists with the same brush. I try not to do that in anything in my life, let alone in business. But, maybe that I think would probably be a piece of advice, just to like not assume bad intent from anybody. And it doesn't even necessarily apply to media. It's just that I see that, there is that strain already that is pretty common in the industry.
No, it's going to be very interesting. I think you're right. There's a lot of the space has grown so much, which includes the journalists to cover the space as well, right? So it's important from that perspective.
This episode is also brought to you by ACX. Do you work at a crypto company and looking at scaling your customer support function while reducing cost, or looking at improving your community management, or even looking at support for account opening, KYC checks, or client remediation? Well, ACX can help. ACX is the world's first specialized crypto customer support, compliance support, and community management outsource provider. ACX enables crypto platforms to offer 24/7 crypto specialized customer support and community management to their clients in multiple languages, including English, Russian, Turkish, Arabic, Spanish, and French, by leveraging dedicated staff that are 100% advanced crypto trained and multilingual. Find out more at acxinternational.com. Make sure to also check out their annual crypto customer support report, where they independently analyze the customer support levels of 30 crypto platforms globally. Now, back to the show.
Let's switch over to your book, Laura. Obviously, your upcoming book is coming out on February 22nd, 2022, titled The Cryptopians, Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. Can you share maybe with our listeners, what is the book about, and what are some of the key topics that you cover in the book?
For anybody who was into crypto in the year 2017, 2018, you probably saw that there was this really almost out of nowhere phenomenon that just sort of took over, which was the initial coin offering craze. And so my book looks at how that happened. And because Ethereum was the main platform for that, the book is mostly a history of Ethereum, maybe I'm not sure exactly, like 2/3 or 75% a history of Ethereum. And then, so it kind of just like starts by showing what Ethereum went through, how it became what it became. And then toward the end, when the ICO craze is really going on, then it kind of splits off into multiple different stories, because at that point, crypto was very global, and it wasn't even necessarily just about Ethereum anymore, but it was about all these newbies that were getting in and a lot of scams that were going on. And there was just like all kinds of activity. So that's really, what the book is about. And I personally think it really shows kind of the human side in terms of all the different types of personalities that were in this phenomenon. And frankly, a lot about what Vitalik himself was going through, Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum. And one of the blurb writers actually mentioned that in their blurb. They said something, it's Jeff Roberts, who is the executive editor at Decrypt and wrote Kings of Crypto. He said something about how the book showed the human side of Vitalik as never seen before. So, I feel like for people who kind of really want to understand that period of time, not just to understand Ethereum, but to understand what Vitalik himself was going through, I think it provides a really great lens for that.
And actually, from writing the book, what was some of the things that really surprised you the most? I'm sure some of the moments you spent with Vitalik covering some his how he felt, but like, what was some of the most surprising things that came out while you were researching and writing the book?
Wow. I probably would have to mention here the DAO attack on Ethereum in 2016. Which, for anybody who either doesn't know that or even was following it at the time, the DAO was the pivotal event in Ethereum's history. It was the incident that created Ethereum Classic, and it, even 6.5 years after Ethereum's launch, it is still the only incident that really was an existential crisis for Ethereum. And I can't remember if I mentioned this in the book, but one of my sources said, at that time, the DAO was Ethereum. The DAO had 14.6% of all ETH in it. This one smart contract had that percentage of Ether in it. It had more Ether than the Ethereum Foundation had. And so when 31% of it was hacked, basically one person had 5% of all Ether, right? I mean, it was just a really frankly, crazy and kind of breathtaking time. And then it set in motion a lot of events, and you're going to read about it in my book. But let's just say there was so much craziness, and there were just a lot of really tough choices that the people who were kind of trying to patch this thing up had to face. And they didn't always make the right decision, at least by their retelling of it. But you'll see that they kind of like really grappled with these things, and the community would always take them to task if they felt that they had made the wrong decision. But it's definitely It's probably my favorite part of the book. There's just so many crazy things that happen. I really, a lot of it isn't known before, so I'm not gonna be able to talk about it too much. But all I'm gonna say, you guys, is once the book comes out, you will definitely hear about some of this.
That's awesome. I think the people will be excited to read about it from that perspective. How did you find time to write it? Laura, I'm about my third book will be published at the end of Q1 or early Q2, and it's a astronomical amount of work and hours. How did you manage to find time to write the book despite all the other activities you have?
I'm in the really lucky position of, making most of my income, if not like literally nearly almost all of it, from my podcasts. And I do 2 podcasts a week, one on Tuesday, one on Fridays. And it doesn't take me 5 days of work to do the 2 podcasts. I also do a newsletter every day. But again, it's not something that takes my whole time. And so I really had probably more than half of my time, my working time, to work on the book. And unfortunately, the one thing I will say is trying to write a book covering that time period was when there's just so much going on in crypto, and, you have like multiple levels of the story, right? You've got just like understanding what was happening on a technological level, like that was challenging. There were a lot of things that, by this point, right, I had spent years covering the technology. And yet when I went to write the book, multiple times I came up against things that I myself did not know about the technology, and I had to come to learn. I had to do multiple interviews to like make sure I understood it. And then not only that, but be able to write about it and explain it so that a person with zero background in crypto could pick up my book and understand what was going on. And, I will say from different readers that I've had that don't know anything about crypto, I did accomplish that goal, which I'm really happy about. But, that took a lot of time. Then understanding the human level, which especially there's like 8 Ethereum co-founders. They did not all get along. And so when you've got people kind of saying negative things about each other, you have to go to the other person, get their response. I mean, it's just, and then like even for events where there's like multiple people at an event, if one person says, oh, so-and-so said this, then you have to check with the other people. Like, did that person say that, or did that event happen? I mean, it's just like, so yeah, it was extremely time consuming. And then the crypto prices were constantly changing, right? So because we wanted to give context for all of the prices, every single time I had like some kind of transaction, I would put the dollar amount in parentheses. My fact checker and I would then, we were just like, okay, so what price do we use? Because on any given day, there's multiple prices. It's like the opening price, the closing price, the high, the low. And so just all of that. I mean, it was like the fact checking on this was like ridiculous. I've never experienced something like that. It was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever been through. But I can say confidently, my fact checker and I tried really, really hard to, dot every I, cross every T. And we try to be as fair as possible, go to everybody with all the things, checked all the math. I mean, it was definitely honestly a labor of love. I'm actually very proud of the book because of all that. And I have amazing footnotes. I love my footnotes. I think the crypto nerds are going to love my footnotes. So yeah, there was just a lot of really nice links to all different blockchain transactions and stuff like that. And it's awesome.
That's going to be very exciting. I look forward to that. Actually, I mean, you're right. The speed of change, forget prices. For my next book, I had to completely rewrite the section on DeFi and CBDC because it was written a year and a half ago just because of the market changed so much. One last question, Laura, before we move to the fire round question round, and the bell is here with me. What's your, let's say, obviously you're producing now a lot of content. You're producing the podcast twice a week, a daily newsletter. What kind of your advice on the importance of content for a lot of not only crypto entrepreneurs but the broader crypto industry, and the role that content and quality content will play in the future of the industry?
Well, I would say that people gravitate towards stories, and so from my perspective, I think of myself really as a writer first. And so, of course, the daily news is important, but I always try to think in that bigger picture about like, why is something important, or what's the significance of this information, so that when I'm doing my longer pieces, I can kind of give people that bigger perspective. So I would say that for people who are producing content, if you're just kind of giving the headlines, I mean, obviously that is a service, but people can also get headlines elsewhere. And so if you can add kind of that little flavor of either your analysis or just, in my case, because I'm a reporter, I would try to kind of get the analysis from different people in the community, then I really feel that is a good value to add to your content.
Oh, that's awesome. I think you've done a great job, Laura, over the last couple of years for the broader community as well, and the content you've created. So, Laura, the time has come. The famous bell is with me. So I'm going to ask you quick questions, Laura. I need 1 or 2 word answers, and we're going to go pretty quickly on these. And the bell will be here to hold us honest. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
Laura, what is the one journalist that you admire the most across any industry? One journalist you've always admired?
Laura Hillenbrand.
Where she work? What was the work she done?
She's a book author, and she has written Seabiscuit and Unbroken.
Here we go. Who is the most interesting guest you've ever interviewed on your show?
The first person who comes to mind is Wences Casares.
Here you go.
CEO of Zappo.
Yep, they're from Zappo. What do you think? What will you do when you're not working? What is the one thing you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Meditation.
There you go. You live in New York right now, Laura. What is your favorite thing to do in New York?
I'm not going to name it, but there's a particular dance party that is my number one favorite thing to do in New York.
Here we go. Of course, now Cryptopians is coming out. Your next book, what topic would you like to write a next book about?
I'm not sure, but maybe DAOs.
There you go. Well, there's a lot to write there. There's been a lot of books written on crypto so far. What's one of your favorites that you recommend to a lot of people to read?
Digital Gold.
Yeah, there you go. Laura, what would you do if you're not a journalist? You could do another profession, but a journalist or writer. What would you do?
Dancer.
Here you go. And last question, Laura, thanks for being with us today. Laura, if you could have lunch or dinner with one person, dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would that be?
The Dalai Lama.
Wow, here we go. Very big one. Well, Laura, thank you very much for being with us. Where can people find you? People want to follow you, follow your content. What's the best way for people to keep in touch with you or to find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Laura Shin, LauraShin. You can pre-order the book at bit.ly/cryptopians, which is bit.ly/CRYPTOPIANS. And you can check out my podcast at unchainedpodcast.com.
Here we go. Laura, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to our listeners again for joining us for the show. Make sure to click subscribe. If you like the show, we'll have another episode every other week coming out. Also, if you want to stay on top of the latest developments on crypto and the future of money, make sure to also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, especially for my weekly Crypto Capsule show where I summarize the global crypto developments you need to know in less than 60 seconds. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter on LinkedIn and Review called The Future of Money, where I share the 3 big ideas in the story format that you need to know every week. And also, if you want to learn more about crypto education, a topic that we discussed with Laura today, make sure to also check out my YouTube channels that have not only my past interviews and the one with Laura today will be on as well, but a lot of crypto educational videos. And the good news now is all my content on YouTube is also available not only in English, but also in French, Arabic, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese across my channels. And also, last but not least, if you want to learn more about crypto, make sure to check out my latest online class on Udemy called Introduction to Bitcoin and Crypto Assets, where I explain in 90 minutes, I know you folks are busy, the latest global crypto trends that you need to know on topics like Bitcoin, Ethereum, stablecoins, DeFi, CBDCs, Web 3.0, Metaverse, and many, many others. So thank you all for joining me today on the show. Thank you very much, Laura, for being with us on this latest episode of the Future Money podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun.
Thank you.